to see me again. As many of you know, Chief Davis has announced his retirement effective March 22nd. That is not why he is not here tonight. It's not like he just said, "Oh, hey, I'm gone, so we'll see you later." He actually had a previous commitment that he could not change. But Lieutenant Dave Bowden and I will be here just talking to you about the budget. We don't have a presentation. We do have numbers that we're going to present to you. And I think we can go. You have one for yourself?
Do we have one more?
We have one more?
Okay.
We're fine.
All right.
He'll share.
Got enough?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can share with you.
Perfect. So as you go through, we're looking at a requested budget of $3,725,000, which is almost a $300,000 increase from the previous year. Total number being $291,507. I think we will go through and the big jump you see there is in officer salaries. So that includes contractual increases for union employees, COLA increases for non-union employees, but really what's driving that is the request for 3 additional police officers. This is not necessarily a new request, right? This is something that we hear each year. A community for the size of Ashland really should probably be around 30 police officers. We got close to that, I think in 2000, we got up to 27. We dropped down to 26 or 25, maybe even a little bit lower over the next 15 years. In the last few years, we've been able to add a couple of officers over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, and I think we're about at 28 now. But this specific budget requests 3 additional officers that are included, which would bring us to 31. Now, obviously, having people on the street is important. This also gives us the ability to look at some potential specialty positions, specifically an additional school resource officer, a dedicated school resource officer. We currently have one. We would look at potentially making another one. Anybody who knows Officer Murray knows he does a great job in the schools, but he does cover 4 different schools, and we think that there might be a benefit of having an additional officer perform that function. Anything else related to the salaries before I move on?
Michael, I have a question. Is there any, just with regard to adding officers, any way that could help us with regard to coverage, overtime? How does that potentially work?
So on one hand, it does help us, so you don't have to have forced overtime or overtime.
Yeah.
On the other hand, that they still, even though they're newer officers, they will carry vacation time with them as well that we would need to cover. Mm-hmm. So this budget request is very, very conservative on the overtime, and you don't really see much of, you don't see really a change at all in that.
Hey, Mike, excuse me. It'll help fill in details.
That's actually a really good point.
Okay.
Thanks, Doug. I think everybody's aware the amount of projects that we have on the horizon, capital projects. So we were talking about downtown, we're talking about Route 126. Downtown has several phases. We've got replacement and relining of water pipes in downtown. We've got the streetscape stuff. We're looking at some projects at the Valentine Estate. What I'm trying to get at is that all of those require police details. And we are actually already at a point where we are having a hard time filling those details. We're actually looking at other communities to help fill those. We're actually going to look at potentially allowing the fire department to fill some of those details if they can, but this would certainly help with that.
Question.
Go ahead, John.
You're going to add 3 new police officers. Would it be any change in the upper levels? Would it be any new lieutenants or sergeants? After a while, you have to add additional.
Well, this was the request. So I think what the request of the police chief to myself, and then what we end up putting forward will be different. So
Okay.
I don't necessarily personally, and I think the police chief and I have had conversations about this. I think we need a deputy chief to kind of serve as that police chief's, the new police chief's kind of, you know, I don't want to say right-hand person, but, you know, it gives them the ability to I think, manage things and manage situations a little bit more effectively. We've got two very capable lieutenants, but I think a deputy chief would be prudent.
So you're looking at that, when he worked different hours, possibly?
Potentially, we would look at
yeah.
the structure.
Yeah.
We'd look at it, at all of that.
Because as you keep adding more people, sometimes you have to, you know, have the support staff further up.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have two questions, one budget, one sort of budget. Just to the comment on the utilization of firefighters for detail filling. There was some discussion at one of our prior year meetings such as this about the auxiliary police department. How are they utilized? I know there isn't much allowance, if any, in the budget for auxiliary, but would that be a different way to fund things like supporting details for municipal projects?
They do. We do have auxiliaries that function as detail officers, especially during events that we have, like the Dragonfly Festival or the Farmers Market. There's, you know, I think there's restrictions on when we can use auxiliaries from a contractual standpoint, but then also, I think from a public safety standpoint, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, but, you know, usually if we're doing like some traffic management and things like that, we try to utilize,
The auxiliaries are certainly allowed to do traffic details, but they're not always available. Most of them, if not all of them, have regular full-time jobs when they're working during the day. So they're not available
I
for details.
shudder a little bit to hear the word firefighter used for a police detail when we've worked really hard to try to get additional firefighting staff, so just a.
I will point out that those firefighters would not be on shift at the time. They would be off shift. So, and it's something that they have brought up. I think the fire department has brought up the possibility of working details in the future over the last few years. I know since I've been in Ashland, which is coming on 6 years, you know, that's been a discussion point, not a major discussion point.
And then the budget question was, just looking back over the years, there have been some bumps, between 18 and 19, there was a very minor decrease. Prior year, there was a little bit more of an increase than what's being requested now. Is there a forecasted sort of amount that you're working within, when you consider increases in the police department budget? This is a little bit up some years, stable other years, up the next year.
Right. So I think, you know, we'd probably be looking at around a 2 to 3% increase.
Okay.
So, you know, 10% of the budget right now would be, you know, 370,000. You know, 1% would be 30. Yeah, so yeah, probably like 100,000, maybe 100, 120.
Sorry, just going back to the hiring new officers. We have to pay to send them to the academy and all that stuff, don't we?
So they, yes.
Yeah.
Unless they're in a lateral, which means they're already academy
Already
trained.
academy trained, but we do pay them a salary. It's a training salary. It's lower than
Yeah.
when they get out.
Mm-hmm. And then I'm sure there's a couple of years worth of just on-the-job training.
Yeah, they have to do a ride-along.
After they get
Yeah.
out, they have 3 to 6 months of probation
Okay.
training with a
Okay.
field training officer.
Okay. And so then there's an officer with them. I mean, do we have a sense of how much it kind of costs to kind of completely get a new officer on board from like start to finish to the point where they're no longer kind of requiring this maybe overtime from another officer? Just get a sense of like the total cost of bringing on a new officer.
So the new officers aren't gonna cost
Yeah,
any,
you want-
no.
Why don't you get up?
Yeah.
There's really, other than the cost of their salary, there's no overtime cost
Okay.
or anything like that. I think we have to buy them a bulletproof vest,
Mm-hmm.
a gun, taser,
Yeah. Okay.
but
So just
no
kind of
overtime cost.
Nothing material beyond that.
No.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. We good on
Questions?
that one?
Yep.
I think, you know, the other, obviously, we see a little bit going up with incentives. You know, other incentive, we have different incentive programs as part of the contract. As different officers achieve different qualifications, we've made an adjustment there for that. Maintenance service contracts and computer maintenance, that's usually, and what is happening here is just, your general inflation and things get more expensive each year. And that is really, I think, the meat and potatoes of what we're talking about in terms of an increase. I think, if you look at this, if you look at the overall increase of 291,000 that's been requested, the salaries line makes up 270 of that, so, the bulk of it. So I don't want to necessarily, take up any more time than we need to, but sure I can answer any questions, or Lieutenant Bowden can answer any more questions.
So, does the officer salary include the salary of the chief, either Chief Davis or whoever his replacement's going to be in the future?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
So next up would be Chief Roby in the Fire Department.
We can really throw him off and make him put his presentation up himself. There you go, Chief.
Thanks.
Good luck.
Thank you. Just to give you a little rundown of our year last year, we did 2,294 calls, 1,525 EMS calls, and 14 structure fires, and that's in town and responding mutual aid. So right now, the department's made up of 22 firefighters. We have the chief, the captain, 4 lieutenants, and then 4 firefighters to each shift, which is 16 firefighters total. Also, we have 4 dispatchers, 1 administrative assistant. So as I go over our request, our biggest request is looking for a deputy, which we came forward last year trying to get, and also adding on 2 firefighters to continue adding on there. So my first slide is more the personnel line items. My biggest increases is 51130, which is the personnel. That includes the deputies increase and the 2 firefighters. 51310 is the overtime vacation time item. That would include the new firefighters' vacation time plus anybody who's getting step increases over the next fiscal year. 51420 is the holiday line item. That one there, it's been a problem for us. It's been underfunded. We haven't brought it up with the staffing we had. So I brought it up to the staffing we need to cover under the contract, plus adding on the 2 new firefighters. So that's why you see a jump on that one. And then the next biggest one there is 51440's incentives. That would be the cost of adding 2 paramedics. So we'd hire 2 paramedic firefighters. That would be their stipend.
Chief, with the addition of the deputy and the 2 firefighters, how many units would be on at any given time?
So with that, it would increase, the deputy would be a day position. We'd put a firefighter on 2 of the shifts. Ultimately, the goal would be to get 2 more in the future years to make each shift go up to 6.
Okay.
Ultimately, the goal right now, if we roll out of the station, we go 3 men on a truck, 2 on a truck. So if the ambulance goes, 2 will go on the truck, 3 will go on the engine.
Right.
But if we get hit with the second call, as they're going to that call, we're in a jam for getting the other ambulance on the road. So the way I see it is if we can get the 6th guy, we can hold 2 back, cover both ambulances, and that would cover a lot of our using resources, outsourcing it to another town to come in, and also increase the revenue for our ambulance. So on the second page of our line items, the real big increase there is 52450, that's contracted services. The biggest increase there is for our ambulance billing. So that's contracted out, and it's a percentage base, so the revenue that we're bringing in from the ambulance bills has gone up, so the cost of the billing service has gone up. So that's what you'll see there. I mean, last year alone, our billing was a little over $42,000 just for the billing costs. So that's just a highlight of what we were asking for. Going over it, why do we want a deputy? As I presented last year, our deputy would be the primary fire prevention officer, also in charge of fire education, so they'd be getting out there doing more educating with the kids. This year, we were able to get a grant to fund some teaching for students in the schools, but also teaching seniors at the senior center. So we'd like to see increased roles in that. The deputy also serves as my operations officer for the fire department, and if I'm out of town, unavailable at a meeting or something, the deputy assumes the role. One of the bigger things we have right now with the deputy is if I can't attend a chief's meeting, being regionally or state level, the captain cannot go in my position because she does not have the title of deputy. It's strictly for deputy or chief level officers. With the promotion of a deputy, I would look to refill the captain's position. The captain's position would take on the dedicated training officer, which we don't have. We have a training officer now that's assigned to a shift. So it's hard for him to get all the shifts, as 4 shifts. The captain would be working during the week and be able to get all the shifts, get the training, and do a better system. Also, they'd be available to help the fire prevention and getting out and doing the fire education that we'd like to increase. And currently, I would look to make that my maintenance officer. Right now, one of the lieutenants on shift is responsible for the maintenance of the apparatus. So if a truck goes down during the week, we have to call him in a lot of times to help us out. That would cut down on that. Firefighters, ideally, like I said, we'd look to add 4 in the future. I mean, we've just asked for 2 right now, it being 2 more in the future, to add 1 more to each shift to increase that. That's gonna help us with the multiple calls. It would allow us to staff both ambulances majority of the time. I can't tell you it's gonna happen every time. A lot of it depends. If we're at a structure fire, the guy's gonna be tied up. We couldn't staff both ambulances, but normal day-to-day calls, we'd hopefully be able to staff both ambulances. And people say, does Ashland need to roll both ambulances? I can tell you, over the last 4 days, we've rolled both ambulances 3 out of the 4. So. And with that said, when the 2 ambulances go out of town, I would have still 2 guys back in town to cover. Right now, as soon as they get committed and go out, we call in off-duty guys to backfill. So we would hopefully see decreases, and I think over the years, with just adding the last round of guys, you can see that our overtime costs have gone down in recalls and stuff.
Chief, how many EMS calls did you have last year?
It was 1,525.
It's over 4 a day.
Yeah, so 721 were ALS, and 498 were BLS, so that just tells you the acuity of the transports we get.
Chief, what percentage of the transports go to Metro West, and how many go to other hospitals?
I don't know if the exact percentage, but I'm gonna
Estimate.
yeah, about 90% go to Framingham.
Any other?
Anything trauma is gonna go to UMass and Worcester,
Okay.
and then there's a couple percent there that will request a special hospital because they're under cancer treatment. They might want to go to Newton Wellesley, Milford Cancer, the hospital there. But majority of them are going to go to Framingham or Natick, but Framingham's definitely the
Thank you.
priority.
So with the addition of the deputy and the 2 firefighters, that would put you up to 25 heads. What's the recommended number of heads that we should have in the department based on the size of the town?
I don't know what the recommended number is. I mean, for us to handle today's calls and be staffed for it, we need at least that 6th guy.
Mhm.
We're finding multiple times that we're jammed up without somebody to grab an apparatus because we're committed on another scene. So this is gonna allow us a lot more, a better response.
Sure.
Can you explain a little bit? I just don't know the coordination among other towns. So if you're backed up and another town has to send their ambulance, how is that coordinated and paid for?
So if we call for another ambulance,
Yep.
there's no charge to the town of Ashland. They'll collect
Right,
the
so-
revenue of the transport.
So the ambulance is the bad example, I guess, if there's a
For
fire truck or any other call that we're
There's
having.
no cost to
There's
call.
no cost, okay.
Last year alone, I can tell you, we gave mutual aid out 96 times, but we received mutual aid in 146 times.
Okay.
so that's,
Understood.
Chief, I don't see in your budget, a revenue line for the revolving account for ambulance. I see the expense, the increase, requested increase for ambulance billing. Do you have an idea of, I think last year or the year prior, you said it was approximately $400 per call. Maybe, I could be totally wrong on that. I'm just wondering if you have an estimate of the revenue that's coming back to the department for the ambulance calls.
I think it was 505 last year, right? I believe last year was like 505.
505,000?
Wow.
And how is that money being utilized?
425 comes to our budget for staffing, for the manpower that we added. I'm not sure on the rest.
Last couple of years, so. That's how we funded the 4 additional firefighters, over the last few years.
Okay, and I guess where I wasn't trying to lead, but I guess I am leading. So I apologize. If there are an increased number of calls expected and we're funding firefighters that way, is there any risk that the calls decrease and we find ourselves in a revenue shortage in the future? In other words, if we're funding paid positions with inappropriate use of the word revolving account, but ambulance fees, is that a fiscally responsible thing to do? I think I encouraged it a while ago, and I'm happy that it's working, but I just want to make sure that the balance is there. I guess where I'm going is the ambulance revenue a steady stream of income for the department, adequate to fund additional positions, and these additional positions that are requested, would they be covered by said funds, or is the request for additional monies for salaries above and beyond what would be expected from the ambulance revenue?
I think right now we're looking at billing options, whether it be increases in the ambulance revenue to cover all 3 positions.
Okay.
At current time, no, it would not all be there. Some could be absorbed in there.
But there
not
is
all
some
of it.
room for revenue increase based on
Yes.
what other towns are charging.
Yes.
Or
Actually, I was just working with the town manager about looking at our revenue compared to the towns around us where we're sitting.
Thank you.
Is that totally set by the town, or do the insurance carriers have some control over that? Kind
It's
of putting
mixed.
a ceiling on it?
Mixed. Like Medicare is set.
Medicare's
No
set.
matter what you charge, Medicare's got a set rate, which is a lot lower.
Okay,
Private ambulances pay whatever you're requesting.
okay,
Blue Cross Blue Shield, I believe, has contracts throughout the state, so they pay whatever they've got as a contracted price.
okay. Okay, but suffice to say that there's potentially room for us to increase our fare, for lack
Yes.
of a better term.
Yes.
Okay.
Any more questions? No? Great, thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
So I believe that means Mr. Small's up next for the DPW. I noticed that's the thickest presentation that we received.
Doug likes to use a lot of pictures.
Good evening.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so let's see. So what I did is I kind of stuck up at the ceiling level instead of drilling down this year. But there's the cover page, Ashland DPW, FY20 budget proposal. So this next slide, so the DPW, the following general fund budgets are administered by the Department of Public Works. We have admin, we have the highway department, cemetery, parks and trees, snow and ice, street lighting, and the combined fuel, gas and diesel. On top of that, we have the enterprise funds, but we're not gonna get into that tonight. So the next slide. The following is a list of the number of full-time positions allocated to each budget by department. So admin, there's 1.33, highway 5.26, cemetery, parks and trees 4.25. we don't have any employee salaries allocated to snow and ice, street lighting, or the fuel accounts. The next one is a look at the,
Sorry,
Sorry.
Doug.
Yeah.
Could we go back?
Yep.
These numbers obviously don't equal any specific number of FTEs, so just a clarification, you've taken the budget and divided it by the salaries by department to come up with the FTE number per, I'm just trying to understand what the 1.33 and the 5.2.
I guess it would be full-time employees, but with all the different sections in the DPW, there are percentages allocated for like, say 10% of my salary comes out of highway, 10% could come out of CPT, and so that's it's broken across that way. So is how that is.
So just for the folks that might see this later,
Yep.
it doesn't mean you have 5.26 people in the highway department.
Correct.
It means that
That's how
that's
salaries
how
are
the
distributed.
salary is broken up.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
So 3-year overview of the budgets. I started with FY18, FY19, and then the proposed budget for 20. So admin, as you can see, is for FY18, it's slightly less for the proposed budget compared to FY19 to this year. Highway, there's a substantial decrease of about $75,000 or $70,000. CPT is about the same. Snow and ice, level funded. Street lighting, same, and fuel, the gas and diesel is the same as well.
Doug, how did we come in 18 and how are we looking in 19 for snow and ice? Because it seems like we always go over.
I'll get into that a little later.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Don't say that's the best for last.
All right.
That's the good news. So admin, then I broke down each budget, and it kind of gets into why there are differences. So admin between FY19 and FY20, so there's a decrease of approximately $1,400, and that's due to salaries and longevity changes. That changed that one there, so it's very minor. Highway department, there's a decrease of $67,000, and that's because we had $50,000 in there for stormwater for the general fund, and also senior employees that have moved on or been their salaries have been allocated otherwise throughout the DPW itself. Let me see, cemetery, parks, and trees. Very minor decrease of about $1,000. Same thing, it's veteran employees that have moved on or shifted to other departments. So the next slide, this is snow and ice, Adam.
Yep.
I look at annual cost of snow and ice over the last 7 years. So currently, we've spent approximately $360,000. Last year, we spent approximately $750,000. And then 620 in FY17, 511 and 16, 714 and 15, 585 and 14, and 444 and 13. So hopefully the winter continues to be like this, knock on wood. We're in pretty good shape compared to last year. The salt barn is fairly full right now, which is good news. It's just every time we have an event, it's where we have to call the contractors in. You know, you're talking about $50,000 at least just to call the contractors in. So, any plowable type of events so far we've had, I think, 5 plowable events where we've had to call in the actual contractors instead of just using the town forces.
How many inches do we need to have before how much can we handle on our own versus having to call
There's no exact cutoff.
Yeah.
It depends on the time of day. It depends on whether it's school vacation or not. It depends if it's a Saturday or a Sunday.
Okay.
It all depends. You know, sometimes you might have to call them in for 2-3 inches in order to get everything cleaned up before the kids start to go to the school,
Makes
before the
sense.
buses run.
Sure.
So there's really no, you can't say 3 inches, call them in.
Got it.
It varies on the conditions and then how long the storm is going to last.
Mm-hmm.
If it's, say, a Friday night storm going into Saturday, that's something we can rely on our guys for the most part. They can take care of it throughout Saturday. But if it's a Monday or Tuesday, that's when we're going to need help to get it done a lot faster. Let's see, next one. So purchase of salt, that's between the contracted services with the hired plows and the salt, those are the two big ticket items. So far this year, well, I'll start from the top instead of going upside down like I always do. So FY17, we purchased 3,276 tons of salt. FY18, about 3,500 tons. And so far this year, we've purchased 2,650 tons of salt. So what's funny is, well, it's not funny, but it seems like most of the time your salt is all going to end up somewhere in the same ballpark. It doesn't matter if you get a lot of snow or a little bit of snow. It's just, you just use a tremendous amount of salt, whether you have a 1-inch storm or whether you have a 20-inch storm. So it's normally somewhere, you're not going to see a huge difference from one year to the next.
Doug, just a question goes back to the whole debate that we had about the stormwater thing. Just got me thinking.
Yeah.
And I guess this does relate to finance, so I'll ask it. I mean, put the salt on the roads. How bad is this stuff for the water supply? How bad is it, or not? I mean, I've never asked this question, really thought about it.
Salt causes high blood pressure.
Okay, well, that's true.
So you try, you have to be cautious near, say, our well site. You want to,
Yeah.
We treat that as a low salt area.
Okay.
Okay, so we don't want to douse that area with salt.
Right.
The other areas, see, I find salt better than sand.
Yeah.
'Cause the salt will evaporate or whatever.
Yeah.
Sand will stay on the road or get into the catch basins.
Yeah.
And then in the spring, you have to clean it, and it just pollutes everything. And sand's great at first, but after several cars goes over it, it actually smooths out. It's called the marble effect, and it's smoke and mirrors, believe it or not.
Right.
So salt is the way to go, and salt works in Ashland. You see a lot of these cities and towns, they like to use all these different de-icers and magnesium chlorides or brine mix or things like that.
Yeah.
But Ashland, it works in Ashland. Salt works. We have a couple bridges where we're concerned about, but it's not like you're dealing with 495 where you have these major bridges. That's where you really want to get out and treat with liquid and stuff like that. But in Ashland, we're able to get away with salt. Occasionally you have situations where temperatures are so low, 10 degrees or whatever, that salt really isn't that effective. But most of the time you're going to find during the winter that when we have a snow and ice event, it's going to be somewhere high teens in the 20s where salt still does work pretty good.
Okay.
But there's always that 1 or 2 a year where you kind of wish you had the liquid, but it's not really. I don't think it's worth it. Pound for pound, I don't think it's worth it to get into liquid. But every year a new salesman wants to come in and sell us, and I don't believe in it as much as some other people do. And I think they'll get it, they'll use it for a year or two, then they'll realize it's only a nuisance. It's, it could corrode the trucks, it could corrode your structures or what have you, but that's my opinion. But salt works.
Then
for
what salt
Ashland.
do you use? Sodium chloride, potassium chloride, calcium chloride?
It's sodium chloride.
Sodium chloride.
Yep, and we buy it from Eastern Salt or Morton, and it's brought in from all over the world. It could be brought in from Chile or Ireland or the Pacific Ocean or the Indian Ocean. So it could be brought in from New York or Pennsylvania. It depends, So
I had another question on the roads.
yep.
I noticed, this is kind of an unusual winter. We had that rainstorm and it froze, and then it rained and it froze again, and
Yeah.
it lifted up the pavement in some areas. Do you think in your budget you have enough to cover the repairs? I didn't write all the roads in Ashland, but I noticed some of them have some pretty big potholes that.
I mean, we've been fortunate the last couple of years with Mike has been able to get us an extra, I think we had 150,000 last year for road construction. And I think this year he's proposed another 150 out of capital, or 200,000, I think, which is very helpful. Don't get me wrong, we could easily go out and spend millions of dollars repairing the roads. One of the problems we ran into last fall was the amount of rain that we had.
Right.
So we had a tremendous amount of rain, and at that time we were trying to do a lot of crack sealing. We were trying to do crack sealing and line painting, and in order to do that, you have to bring in a contractor. We farm that out. We don't do that ourselves. The smaller painting jobs we do it, but you can't paint in the rain because it's all water-based. But so a lot of the roads didn't get crack sealed last fall, which is bad news. So a lot of this, like you said, this freeze thaw and all this stuff, we're going to see quite a few potholes this year.
Do you have a regular program for crack sealing?
Yeah, well, actually, the vendor actually came in the other day, and that's something we do with Chapter 90. We use our Chapter 90 money for that. And we'll probably, this year, probably spend about $75,000 just on crack sealing. And so, yeah, hopefully we can get that going after April.
Yeah.
But
Is it-
last year was a bad year, not just for Ashland. If it happens here, it happens everywhere
Right,
else, so.
Right.
But it's a good question, and there are quite a few patches out there that need to be milled and
Yeah.
repaved and all that. Yeah, for sure. But, so like, there's really not much of a change from this year to next year, other than the highway budget with that stormwater, the $50,000.
Yeah, Doug, I was gonna actually ask you to address that, either you or Brittany during the municipal budget. Could you just talk a little bit about how stormwater is gonna be handled for FY19, and if you wanna defer, that's okay.
20.
Sorry, for 20, 'cause I just note in your slides, that the 19 budget did carry $50,000 for stormwater.
Yeah.
Can you just talk a little bit about how that's gonna be funded, either through DPW or other means, or defer?
Well, let me just start for a second, then Mike can jump in if he has to, or Brittany, but we need approximately $300,000 a year for the Stormwater Enterprise Fund. So right now, we're in the process of putting everything together as far as how we're gonna actually bill people, how we're gonna get into the systems. We're still putting together the actual, the rates on what we're gonna charge. We're doing a lot of mapping and just kind of getting our arms wrapped around the entire process. It's very, very difficult. Ashland uses a software system called Munis. So moving forward, our intentions are start the billing in August, is when we're gonna start sending out quarterly bills for the stormwater management program.
And can you just say how the $50,000 was used in the 19 budget? Was it to do some of the activities you just described?
Yeah, well, the $50,000, we had to use it in order to put together the notice of intent for the NIPD's requirements.
Yeah.
We had to hire vendors in order to do that. There were we're working with several engineering firms as far as putting this thing together. We had Kleinfelder for the notice of intent. Then moving beyond that into the stormwater management plan, we're using Fuss and O'Neill. And then that gets into training as far as the IDDE plan, which is illicit detection elimination program. And there's all sorts of expenses to that $50,000 that we've had to use.
And that's in addition to the funds that were allocated at fall town meeting out of free cash? Did we not, I think?
Now, that's the part where you need a little help on that.
No.
Go ahead, Mike.
So yeah, just to reiterate a little bit of what Doug said, the $50,000 that was in the highway budget was to put together the notice of intent, the actual permit application. And during that process, what we did is we identified a budget and what would need to be funded over the next 5-year period. And so in order to start that process, what we did at that point was ask for a transfer from free cash to start that process of implementing those recommendations and implementing those permit requirements. Until we did get the enterprise fund established and the billings put together. We're actually in the process of putting together a recommendation on the rate structure. I think we had a pretty general sense when we talked at town meeting of what that would look like. And so we're gonna finalize that again with the goal of being in the first billing going out in August. I do want to point out, because I know we talked about this when we were talking about the enterprise fund initially, of having a general fund subsidy as part of that to help offset what we would do with the rates. And we would look at doing, it might not necessarily be included in this budget. It will be included in some budget in some way, but we will have some level of subsidy to there.
Yeah, thank you. That's, I guess, that would be helpful just to see line item accounting for that.
Yeah, it might even be easier just to put it in, you continue to put it in the highway budget for that. But I think, I mean, unless you think that that's not as important now than you did then, I thought it was a pretty good point that you made at the last time we talked about it.
I think it's having the town contribute to the overall fund so that it's not all borne by the taxpayers, since the town owns buildings and land within the town and they have skin in the game. To be able to put forward some of that money to bear some of that load, I think would be a very good thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, or to rephrase, it's all taxpayer
Well,
input to begin
yeah.
with, so it's a little bit like the.
Same money.
Like the trash collection, right?
Right.
Where we subsidize that via garbage bags. I think we're subsidizing stormwater via an enterprise fund. I mean,
Right.
that's my take on it, so I do support the use of
Okay.
general funds.
All right,
I
so
don't
we'll,
know how others feel.
Well, and that rate structure coming in front of us before it gets finalized? Is this our last chance to speak on it?
I mean,
I don't think it's gonna be, I don't think the intention is to set it at town meeting, is it?
no, it doesn't get set at town meeting.
No.
Actually,
Curious.
the DPW director is the person under the bylaws, the person responsible for establishing water and sewer and the stormwater rates. We typically defer to the Board of Selectmen as part of that, and then we have a discussion with FinCom, so they'll definitely be part of that. And just, I think in general, we'll be looking at a residential base amount and then a commercial amount based on impervious surface. So to equalize things.
I just want to add, so there was $150,000 that we needed for year one. This is year one of the NIPTES program.
Right.
So we have people in place right now. We have an engineer, and we have two of the guys, a technician, and then also a light equipment operator that's in this. And then a lot of the stormwater is just street sweep and things like that. So the money it's being used also for the operations of stormwater. So any other questions, Jack?
I have a couple.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Any change in staffing for next year you're requesting?
Right now, we're looking pretty good. We filled all our vacancies in all the general fund areas. Down the road, we might need to start talking about water and sewer. But as far as the cemetery department goes, there's pretty much 2.5 people over there, and then with the fields, 2.5 to help maintain the fields. So, but as far as water and sewer down the road, we might have to start. There's only, I think, 5 or 6 people in there to continue taking Ashland to the level where we should be.
The reason I mentioned it, Doug, we heard in the presentation from the fire department, the police department, they're asking for more firemen, more police officers, and deputy chiefs, and, the town's growing, and, sometimes the DPW gets left behind. So,
Well, it's a good question. We just filled the engineering position. So we have some new people there that are coming along pretty good. And we also have we created that deputy director's position. We filled that last year as well. But like I said, I don't know Mike's vision 100%. I don't know who does, but
as the town grows, more people on the roads, we're gonna get more potholes.
Yeah.
And like most towns, we're behind on the paving. We should be rebuilding our roads more
True.
often than we do, but because of financial constraints,
everything
we don't.
But everything comes with a price also. Every time,
Right.
every time you add a body, then you start looking at equipment. You start looking at, do you have enough bathrooms? Do you have enough facilities? So there's kind of a fine line on, how many people can we really facilitate? So, there's a few. It's a big conversation, but as far as the manpower goes, we're in good shape. We're in great shape today compared to where we were at 2 years ago.
Thank you.
Just to kind of piggyback on that, I think another thing that we look at and that we will be looking at is, especially in regards to DPW, because some of those tasks lend themselves to this more, but is instead of hiring additional personnel, maybe look at contracting out some services. That might be the most cost beneficial and get us the most bang for our buck as well. So if you can quantify and kind of put in a bucket certain tasks, whether it's like mowing, things like that, maybe that makes sense to do more from a contracting standpoint than adding on additional personnel. The personnel that we have on now, I don't see us reducing them at all. I mean, we have plenty for them to do. But as we expand, I think, Jack, as you point out, as our service expectations increase, we might look at contracting out in addition to adding personnel. Actually, a very, very good place where this salient point, I think, right now is actually with tree work. We have a whole backlog of tree work that we need to do. We're seeing the evidence of that now with the recent storm. You know, that is something that perhaps we could put towards contracted services and maybe knock that backlog out over the course of a year. You obviously don't want to hire on additional people for a long-term liability for a project that might take a year, 2 years. So, sorry.
Did you want to redirect your question for the chiefs?
Yeah, if it's okay, I have another question for both Chief Roby and Lieutenant Dave. Bowen.
Bowden.
And Michael, it's probably coming to you as well before you sit down. Something Doug sparked a question for the two of you as it relates to the new public safety building and a combined staff, if my numbers are right, of 25 firefighters and 31 police officers, so 56, staff of 56. How is the new public safety building being designed to accommodate your current and future staffs? And that's not really a budget question per se, but I think Doug's comment about facilities is really insightful, and you have an opportunity to plan for that. So I just wanted to know.
Yeah, I can actually answer that as part of the process. So we had the public safety building, the test fits that we were using. The size of the building is 44,000 square feet, or approximately 44,000 square feet. That was designed to handle growth, I think, up through the years 2035. Was that 2035? So both the police and fire chief were involved in putting together that program budget. Like, you know, how many lieutenants are we going to need? You know, on the fire side, I think there is a deputy chief and a captain in there, you know, and additional firefighters. So it's all been programmed according to that growth that we would be expecting.
So then, to flip that around again, it sounds like we would be planning for growth. So, you know, in consideration of the request for increased staffing, you know, we should be striving to meet those expectations for 2035. So it's just a comment.
Yeah.
I don't know how we accommodate maybe all of the requested increases, but
Yeah, it's really difficult, and I think also just from a general strategy standpoint, and this is one of the things, Ryan, that we talked about at the joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen, is that as our budget has grown over the last few years and we've seen some of these opportunities through the economic growth that's happened, we have looked at not just adding personnel, but also putting money into things that could be cut back when we do see a recession that inevitably happens, so we don't have to cut people. So I think we've done a pretty good job of balancing that. You know, instead of maybe adding 8 firefighters over the last 4 years, we've added 4. Instead of adding maybe 4 additional police officers over the last 4 years, we've added 2. I think you will see probably that trend continue until we hit that next recession, and then we'll have to basically arrest any type of growth. We'll probably have to look at reductions in some of the, you know, other expense items as well until an economic recovery happens. So.
Okay. More
Thank you.
questions? Yeah. All right. Up next, Ms. Benetti for the library.
It's okay. This year's. Oh, that's what happened.
So just my two-page presentation. So just to recap, you know, the last couple years, we added hours to the library. We actually were closed on Mondays. So 2 years ago, we asked for a modest increase of adding 5 hours on Mondays, and we opened in the evening. And then last year, we were able to add a 12-hour position, which was a morning position, which gave us personnel to open on Monday mornings. So I'm just happy to report that we've seen an increase. Our goal was access, really, to the library, and that allowed us to collaborate with the YMCA to add another program. We have some children's programming on Monday mornings, and collaborating with the senior center to do some evening programming. So we have seen a definite increase. We also added 2 years ago an evening custodian, and we've seen a definite increase in the meeting space use, particularly with our new equipment, and an increase in the attendance to children's programming. So, and the other accomplishment was this year was the first year that we received our full state aid, because we actually met our hours open requirements. So I wanted to start out with that positive there. And so that brings me to this year's request, which is, you know, a very, very modest request again. What we're looking for is an increase in the salary line for 16 hours a month in substitute coverage. My staff has been relatively stable the last couple of years, which I hope I haven't just jinxed myself by saying that, but several of them are reaching 5 years, which means another week vacation. Most of them are union staff. And just because we run many times with just one person or two people in the building, or one person at the desk, I am asking for some substitute coverage, so that is the one increase that I'm looking for there. Office supplies, which is really it's processing materials that we use, the covering the books, the spine labels, and also an increase of 5% increase in printed materials, mainly because things are just getting more expensive. So that's our total request for this year. Any questions from?
Reference books and materials, what type of reference books?
Well, it's really all, it's not necessarily reference books. Actually, we really don't buy reference books anymore. That's just the title of the line item that's been there for, that would be all of our materials across all formats. So that does even include audiobooks, DVDs.
Yep.
And the formats are changing a little bit. I mean, we're definitely moving a little more into a lot more electronic materials. Some of that we're purchasing as part of our membership in Minuteman, so we do a group purchase, which is, you know, a lot more feasible for a smaller library. But we recently purchased Canopy, which is a streaming movie. It's filling a different niche. It's about 60% documentaries and a lot of independent and foreign films, but that's something that we're purchasing independently for Ashland residents. So we're stepping a little bit outside of print, mainly to meet demand for people that are looking. And there's a definite increase in online use of materials.
You don't archive any of the textbooks from the high school, for example, over the years?
No, we don't, no.
question. The, just for clarification, that substitute coverage is not considered overtime? In
No.
other words, current staff is not
No,
eligible
I
to work
actually-
those extra hours?
Yeah, I actually have several staff that are very part-time, so I don't actually, other than my position and the children's librarian, we're the only 40-hour position. So I have leeway. I have a 12-hour position, a 20-hour position. So usually those are the people that are the ones that I go to fill in, but none of it's overtime.
Okay, and it's, does that cover, you mentioned vacation time, primarily as a reason for the request and increased substitute.
I mentioned it because I have several staff members that are going to be getting an extra week, but it's, it's just, I never, I've had.
Has it been a struggle in the past, or budget from a finance?
Usually I fill in, when, or Lois does when we're stretched. I mean, I think I had a little leeway in this year's budget because the position that we added last year didn't get filled till December. So I had almost 6 months of that salary to fill in. But I did, occasionally I have some long-term absences. So this is a little bit based on past history and anticipating, going into fiscal year 20, potentially with people having more time to take off.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So next up would be Aaron Ladd, speaking on behalf of the CPC.
I don't have a presentation. I'm here to answer questions as need be, but I'll let Michael take it from there. And
All right.
No, it's all yours.
I don't know what we're looking at. So I apologize. I was invited to speak as co-chair, but you guys have a presentation ready?
I can give them information.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
I have information I can provide if you'd
Sure.
like to hear it. So in 2018, the CPA fund, they ended with just shy of 2.8 million, and that includes all the categories within the CPA bucket. The general category, open space, historic resources, and the community housing. In 2019, the only article that I'm aware of is the recurring article for the bond payments, just the 3 bond payments, and that's pretty much it.
We don't envision any large projects coming before our committee in the next 2 months. If there's any small requests that come forward in our general obligations, we'll be sure to present those, but we don't have any current town warrant articles or any large projects being submitted to us. In the fall, we had Affordable Housing Trust article that we withdrew, and we're not presenting that again at spring town meeting. So at this time, we don't have any other large articles to consider. So I think there was some confusion in the fall about when to present that, and I think confusion between change in board membership. So Joe Rubertorn and I are now the co-chairs, and we kind of know how the process works a little better about presenting those articles before this committee. But at this time, that article is not moving forward in the spring from last fall.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Brittany, do you have
Yes.
a record of those numbers in the full budget that we'll see?
So the
I couldn't
CPA,
bypass enough.
the,
You said 2.8 million.
so that's actually in a separate fund
Separate.
required by law,
Yeah.
which I could provide upon request, if you'd like the
It
document.
might be helpful to
Yeah.
have a record of the
Sure,
Just to see what that looks like.
sheet.
and I have a spreadsheet of the bond payments as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful to,
Yeah.
Mhm.
I agree.
with the chair.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Good evening.
Brittany, are you going to be covering the remaining
Yes, I
budgets?
am. Yep.
Excellent.
It's not as exciting as previous budgets, but bear with me. Okay. So I'm just gonna go with the highlighted budgets. Those are where the increases are. So starting with the town manager's budget. The increase relates to the renegotiation of contracts and salary adjustments and cost of living adjustments for staff. And that's mainly just to bring salaries to the market. Telecommunications, we had increased services in there. We had flip phones for staff previously, and per my conversation with our executive assistant, the phones have been upgraded finally to iPhones, I believe, so they have more functionality. So the cost per phone is now more. And also, we've added devices in cruisers to allow patrol officers to use their laptop remotely so that they can run registrations with their laptop in their cruiser instead of calling it in, as far as I know. And also, there was upgrade to the communication system in the ambulances. So that is where the increase in telecommunications comes from. The legal budget, we've added another $60,000 in there to bring the budget to $270,000. And that's for increased usage in legal services for a bunch of different reasons. The land purchases that we've had, personnel issues, unfortunately, and labor union negotiations as well.
Have we seen at least a leveling off or a downtick on the open meeting law violation complaints and things of that nature that have reduced some of the need for the use of town council?
I have not. As far as public records requests, I'm still seeing quite a few public records requests. Open meeting law violations, I'm not sure if you have seen a decrease.
Yeah, we have seen a definite decrease in the number of open meeting law violations, the number of open meeting law violations that get accelerated or elevated up to state level status, and then also the public records requests. We have a pretty solid process now, where if we do have the public record, we're able to provide it. If we're not, we are able to communicate that pretty efficiently to the person. And so that hasn't been elevated as well. I do want to point out a couple of things that, Brittany has pointed out here. Is we have a couple of issues before us that are going to require increased legal resources. So there's land purchases. We've also have some litigation that I can't talk too freely about right now, dealing with some land matters and defending a couple of our boards and committees in some of their decisions. We also have this EverSource, this pipeline, which we have filed for intervenor status, and we are utilizing legal services significantly in that area as well. Probably so much that I'm going to come to you and ask for a reserve fund transfer this year to help cover some of that. So those are some of the things that are in legal.
How was the discrepancy between the planned and actual covered this year? The $62,000 difference. Maybe I missed that. We budgeted $210 in FY19. Proposed budget is $60,000, and that looks like it's based on the 18 actuals.
Yeah, I think I was optimistic and hoping for a decrease in legal services, and I haven't seen a decrease in it.
Yeah, so let me rephrase. How did we cover the $60,000 difference? Where did those monies come from in FY19?
The transfer hasn't been done yet. We would request a transfer at the end of the fiscal year between May and June. We'd come before FinCom and Board of Selectmen to obtain approval to transfer money. But as of right now, we haven't gone from the reserve or other departments' availability. But as of right now, we haven't exceeded the budget.
Of 210.
Of 210, right. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely, please.
On the telecommunications, how is this a one-time? Is that considered a capital expense? I mean, it's not capital; it's equipment.
No.
It sounded like it was equipment, unless I misheard. How frequently would that equipment need to be replaced or updated? I mean, iPhones come out every 3 years, whatever.
I don't think we're gonna.
How frequently are we looking at replacements? And is there budget in there for a lost phone, a dropped phone, a broken phone?
The phone I know itself is free, so we receive the phones for free. It's just the functionality of the phone. Yeah, it's a contract. Yeah.
This is data related, essentially. essentially.
Right, right.
Because we were presumably paying for.
We were paying, I
phone.
think, $15 for a flip phone, but now since we've finally upgraded to an iPhone, it's now $35 per person.
Who negotiated this service contract with the provider? Because presumably that's a large municipal contract, right? If we all of a sudden have, I don't know, 60 new phones in town, all sharing data or whatever, was there someone that was responsible for negotiating the contract with the service provider? I mean, presumably we're not paying for every single phone on a per gigabyte basis.
No.
Yeah, so Sue Roby, our executive assistant, she's been handling the phone systems, cell phone systems for at least since I've been here and well before. So she has, she's the one who negotiates and works all that. She's the one who is able to get it to where we don't have to pay for the phones. You know, we get the actual free phones as well. So it's her responsibility.
That's your phone. Do you have any other questions on those first budgets? Moving on. Okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. Moving on to the town accountant's budget. The increase is related to renegotiation of my contract and also an increase in our audit costs. The assessors department has an increase of $26,000, and they actually have to go through a conversion of their appraisal software. The Department of Revenue is mandating that the assessors department change their appraisal software, so that increase in their contracted services line item will cover the conversion costs in assisting with that, which I believe is going to now be through Munis.
So I assume that'll go back down again once the conversion's
Right,
finished.
yeah, this is just to cover the conversion costs and to get the data that's currently in CAMA
Over to
into,
the new system.
and make sure it's done right.
Yep.
Yeah. Next, inspections department, it's going down about 47,000, and that is due to a decrease in inspections by our wire inspector, electrical, plumbing. So we've actually seen a decrease in revenue as well on the other side, on the revenue side.
From the
From,
permits?
yeah, from permits, and now that the big developments are coming offline, we've seen a decrease in the salaries as well as the revenue. Veteran services, we've seen an increase of almost 25,000, and that is due to an increase in the assessment from 34,900 to 51,000. The assessment's based on the district's budget, and the district has approved the addition of a support specialist, along with benefits, and that was about 62,000. So they've allocated that among all of the towns that share the veterans agent. And also we've added a couple $1,000s more for benefits payments for our veterans. Total debt, so excluded debt is increasing, and so is our non-excluded debt, and that is due to the town actually borrowing the money now permanently for those projects that were previously authorized at prior town meetings. It's about 2 or 3 prior town meetings that we had authorizations for, and now we actually went into the market and borrowed the money. So that's where that increase comes from.
So do you know which properties this is for roughly? Is it Valentine and?
Yep, so the excluded debt is the Valentine property, the Mendez feasibility study is of 1 million, and the middle school roof. So that's the excluded portion of it. Non-excluded is right from our capital plan, 5-year capital plan. It's a variety of different projects.
Okay.
Jumping to the insurance, our employee retirement assessment, we were given an estimate of 6.5% increase. I'm not sure when the actual final assessment will be out, hoping in a few months. So as of right now, I budgeted 7% just to be safe for our retirement assessment. Unemployment, I felt comfortable decreasing a little bit. Our unemployment costs have been pretty low the past couple of years, so I decreased that to 60,000. health insurance, we're seeing a, GIC is estimating a 3.3% increase on average for the plans. So as of right now, we have 4% budgeted in for the health insurance, and we also have a contingency of $350 in the health insurance budget, and related FICA increase, and our OPEB expenses is also included in that health insurance line item as well. So it appears that it's an 8% increase, but it includes other lines as well as not just health insurance. It's OPEB, it's FICA, it's the life insurance, and so forth. Salary contingency, we have one union that has settled so far, that's DPW. The remaining 3 are still in the works. So there was a certain percentage budgeted for those unions, and also a certain percentage that was budgeted for non-union staff once performance evaluations are complete. Any more questions?
Any questions?
Are we gonna be discussing the general fund overview sheet that you kindly shared with us?
We can, yeah.
Is that okay? Is that
Yeah,
within
absolutely. Yeah,
purview?
I think so.
Could you walk us through this?
Yeah, sure.
I think just for the benefit of those,
Sure.
maybe watching or watching later.
Well, I apologize, I don't have it on PowerPoint.
We'll have it in
But
the
I'll-
minutes
okay.
of the meeting.
Yep.
Since it's been shared with us, so
Okay.
anyone that wants to pull
So-
it up
yeah.
and then can
Yep.
rewatch this along with the sheet in front of them.
Okay,
That'd be okay.
fair enough. Okay, so starting at the top, starting with our tax levy. So we've actually, you'll see in FY '19, the new growth was at 850,000. New growth was actually certified at around 1.2 million. So we've added the additional new growth into the prior year levy to bring it to the 44,355,000. So that's been adjusted to factor in the certified new growth.
Right.
We factor in the 2.5% increase. Our estimated new growth for FY '19, which our assessor has estimated at 900,000. And we also add in our excluded debt, and that was from our debt budget that I talked about previously. And that includes all of the authorizations that we had. And that gets us to our actual levy. The state aid is the big one here. You'll see the jump for Chapter 70 from 6.1 million to 7.7 million for Chapter 70. So that is the jump that took us all by surprise. We see a slight increase in our unrestricted government aid of about 35,000. Local receipts, that's at 4.2 million. It's a slight decrease from last year. I don't have the figures in front of me right now for the different categories, but from what I remember, there's been a slight decrease in permits from last year, building permits, wiring, plumbing, and so forth. But we have increased motor vehicle excise taxes to offset that. Okay, and meals tax also has been taken out of that equation as well.
Yeah, and have you added that $220,000 back into another line? You mentioned a economic development fund that's not currently reflected here.
It wouldn't be reflected in here. It would be, when you get the list of the revolving funds, it would be reflected there. But we haven't done anything with that yet, because what would need to happen is the home rule petition would need to be passed, it'd have to be filed. Before we were able to do that, we would need to go through a pretty long process.
Okay, so I guess maybe speaking to that process before we get to town meeting and the finance committee has to make a recommendation on the budget, will that process be done by then? I'm just trying to understand how you're gonna reflect the meals tax receipts in the FY '20 budget for town meeting.
What we would probably include that as a list in the revolving funds. So each time in the budget, we have that whole list of the revolving funds.
Right.
We would probably add it. So
But it'll be
understanding that
contingent
there would be a
on a
contingency.
subsequent article approving said
Yeah, it would
revolving
have to do that. So we would probably account for it on the revolving funds. And that would be contingent, of course, upon it passing, the home rule petition passing at town meeting and going through the legislature and stuff, so. If that makes, does that make sense?
I think so.
It makes sense. I think it just, you may need to provide a pretty good explanation of a $0 amount there and where it shows up in the budget and where it will go if the home rule petition is denied or the article doesn't pass at town meeting.
So it would then go back.
Revert back to the general fund.
General fund,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Dropping down to other sources, you see the, let's see, indirects from our enterprise funds, our CPA fund reimbursement. The general fund pays for the bond payments, and then the CPA fund reimburses the general fund. Jumping to the expense side, our general fund budget. So on top of the 2.5% increase for us, we received an additional $338,000 from Chapter 70 to get to the 12 million. The schools are at 33 million. Keefe Tech, I know they haven't presented yet, but we're expecting that to go down by about 200,000, if not a little bit more. Non-excluded debt, excluded debt was spoken about earlier. Capital, we have level funded at 750. Benefits and insurance, all those numbers roll up. So employee retirement, health insurance, workers' comp, other health insurance, other insurances, that's all rolled up into one number, the 10.5 million.
Okay.
Reserve fund is level funded, snow and ice. Overlay, that has dropped down from 275 to 200. Last year was the revaluations for the town. The DOR requires it now every 5 years from 3 years. So we would expect a jump in our abatements and exemptions in the year that valuations are redone for houses and homes. And then dropping down a little bit more, we did see a slight increase in our transportation authorities to 178, and a slight decrease in school choice sending tuition, 116 to 86,000. And charter school, as of right now, per the governor's budget, is almost leveled from last year. That's pretty basic run through of the general fund budget.
Yeah.
I seem to be the one with all the questions.
No, go ahead.
Sorry. So, for those that aren't able to keep up, it looks like a $4.5 million increase in total appropriated expenses, or about 7%, 7+%.
Closer to 8.
Yeah. So I which is great, and I might be helpful to just walk through where the delineation of that $4.5 million is coming from one more time, recognizing that 1.7 is coming from increased Chapter 70 funding. That's a big chunk of it. And I guess then in context, as I heard the earlier presentations for staffing increases, which amounted to, around that same level, 7-8%, just on the, broad stroking on the surface, it seems like all of that's doable. So it could either be a really, it's maybe a unique opportunity to see what's really needed if we're going to make this budget work, but it also makes me a little bit gun shy when we see a 7% increase in revenue and expenses. That's a big number. When I asked Michael earlier about what we could expect for 2-3% general increases in staffing, I believe for police was at that time. So maybe you could just help me reconcile some of those.
Sure.
comments.
So on the tax side, so 2 million of it off the bat comes from the 2.5% increase of our levy, and 900,000 estimated for new growth. So that's 2 million of it right there.
But
And then
the new growth numbers are consistent with every year, right? So it's
well, no. So in prior
I thought we had
years,
talked about maybe knocking those numbers down a little bit because
in the forecast, they have been dropped down significantly.
Okay.
To reflect back to when the recession was around, or maybe a little bit later. About that time, it was about $400,000 to $500,000 that new growth was coming in at. And then when all the developments came on board, new growth jumped to around 1.2 million, 1.1 million. So it's being scaled down a lot in future years. And that's reflected in the forecast. And then, so that's 2 million of it would be the 2.5% increase in new growth. And then the other couple of million is from
Chapter 70.
Chapter 70.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so
And
the
other
levy,
state
the
aid.
levy increase of 2.5% is consistent with some of the earlier comments about increase in staffing, just, again, grossly. So just a,
Yeah, well, but it sounds like the 2.5% increase with the levy and the new growth accounts for your 3 to 4% growth increase as typically seen, and the other 3 to 3.5% is coming from that state aid on the Chapter 70. So you're right, we kind of got a big bonus, if you will, that we weren't expecting, and obviously we can't count on that every year.
that's,
Well,
So-
you can't expect,
question was.
you know, you can't expect that increase
Right.
each year. But it's certainly a healthy injection of funds into, you know, something that we weren't expecting. Something that, again, has been advocated for decades now. It's finally coming to fruition. But it does, you know how I like to show the graph that shows our expenditures per
Right.
capita and how it's on the low end? Well, that's going to change now.
Right.
We're going to be a little bit more in the middle. But it's due, I think it's important to note, it's due to the increase in state aid and not necessarily an increase from taxpayer funds that
Sure, but
helps do that.
if, let's assume that number goes back to what it normally has been for state aid, if we've gone and hired the extra personnel that are being proposed, are we gonna be able to maintain those personnel when we're back at the 3%, 4% level of growth, you know, without, because I don't wanna hire people and then a year later have to lay off 2 for every one because of when we start talking about, you know, unemployment and all the other benefits that go with that.
It's a very good point and a very good question. And I think we've thought about that and we have prepared for it in two separate ways. So first, if we start seeing dramatic cuts in state aid due to a recession, we start seeing these large decreases in some of what I call the elastic revenues, motor vehicle excise tax, building permits. So we now have a very, very robust stabilization fund that is designed for those impacts. So, you know, 6 years ago, we had a stabilization fund of like $2 million. Now we're close to $6 million. So, and that is designed to be, in our financial policies, are explicit as to when that gets drawn down, and one of those triggers is a decrease in state aid. The second thing is that some of the things that we are adding, again, we're trying to find that balance between adding things, adding personnel, and then putting money towards things that aren't necessarily going to require people, but they're important nonetheless. Things like training, things like contracted services. So when we do hit that inevitable downturn, we're able to cut those and not necessarily cut people. Because one thing that always gets lost is when you lay off people, you still have to pay unemployment. So what happens is you actually have to lay off essentially 2 people to account for one person's savings. So you don't want to get in that morass, I guess, of it's bad.
Yeah.
Just put it that way.
the Chapter 70 increase, was it formulaic this year? Is there any insight about that significant increase? I mean, I know it was something that's been argued for, or you know, for some time. It sounds like it was a surprise. I'm wondering if it will be you know, I guess my question is, was it a formulaic increase?
So it was partial. So we saw an increase in Chapter 70 due to the fact that now we have tuition-free full-day kindergarten. So we get to count those kids as part of our Chapter 70 equation. Second, we started getting, you know, based on the governor's budget, more funding associated with ELL students, kids that have maybe some higher needs than others. We're starting to see more funding flow for those students as well. But then a good chunk of it is just, okay, funding Chapter 70 at the amount that was identified that need to be funded through the funding formula process. In the review, I think, which happened in 2015. So it's kind of partial. I wouldn't say it's half and half, but it's pretty evenly split.
But I think, probably getting to your point, these are all things that are likely to stay consistent. Yes, next year, as opposed to, I know we wait every year for the number, but we're not expecting a similar surprise. going the other direction.
No, I mean, I certainly do not expect to see a huge increase like this again. This is more of a recalibration now,
Right.
and that's how we've treated it. And just kind of going to your point about, you see this big increase, and we see, some of the requests and the ability to fund all of those requests. We also have the school department, and they're in the process of, I think their budget hearing is actually, their school committee budget hearing is tomorrow.
Yep.
And so they have some requests as well. Two things that we haven't really talked about, and I don't think we have to, they're certainly not in an emergency or an acute stage right now, but the two things that were identified as potential liabilities or concerns for our bond rating agency were our OPEB liability and our pension liability. And they also pointed out the fact that, they feel like the team here is strong enough to identify that as a liability and make adjustments towards that. So, but I do want to say we probably in the future are going to need to maybe look at doing something like a pension stabilization fund for some of these large increases in pension costs, and maybe accelerate a little bit more what we put into OPEB. We're basically going to need to look at that and kind of ramp up what we do in the future.
Are we still fully funding OPEB obligations for new employees?
Yes, so that's what Brittany talked about. So the new employees that we bring on, we put aside 100% of what's known as their annual required contribution, their ARC, into a line item in the budget, and that is reflected in the health insurance budget.
Did you have a question?
I was just gonna say you're gonna make Jim Hanna happy.
Well, we have always addressed OPEB.
Happier.
Happier, let's put it that way. I don't know if we're ever going to get to
Yes.
the point, and I've got to clear this up at this point in time. I think there's I don't know if it's widespread, but there's a misconception that does get spread around somewhat, that there's this huge $40 million liability that it's going to come due at one time, and there's going to be a $40 million check that the town has to write. That's not true. I hate saying it's not true because that sounds like it minimizes it. What that means is that that's a liability that gets spread over time as well. And what you would see is our health insurance budget go higher and higher and higher and start eating up and crowding out more that we're able to put towards services. So I just want to correct that.
Any additional questions?
I just had one quick question I meant to ask when Doug was up, and either Doug or Mike might be able to answer. When a tree falls down on the power lines, does the town incur any cost for that? Or is that the utility companies take care of the removal of the tree and everything?
Yeah, excuse me, normally Eversource
They take
takes
care
up
of
that
everything?
cost,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah, okay.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. So I would just wanted to say thank you to all the chiefs, department heads, the town manager, Ms. Iacoponi for coming tonight, presenting to everyone so that we can continue these policies of transparency and so that everyone can see what's going on from a budgeting point of view. I also want to make sure that everyone knows our next Finance Committee meeting is scheduled for next week on Tuesday, March 5th. Also wanted to extend sympathies, prayers and support to the Silver and the Duca family. All of the town is pulling for you. And if there's no other comments, I would move that we adjourn the meeting for tonight.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So moved. Thank you.